Have you ever hit a straight section of road, shifted up, and felt like your bike just lost its punch, like you're fighting the machine instead of working with it? You twist the throttle harder, thinking you need more power, maybe a new exhaust, maybe a tune. Here's the truth. Your bike has plenty of power. The problem isn't your engine. It's three tiny mistakes you make every single time you shift gears. These mistakes are killing your speed, destroying your momentum, and making every ride feel like a battle. Once you fix these fundamental errors, your bike will feel smoother, faster, and more connected than ever before. Let's break down exactly what you're doing wrong. Mistake number one, the full clutch pull death grip. The first mistake is yanking that clutch lever all the way back to the handlebar for every single upshift. You learned this in your MSF course, and it made perfect sense for safety when you were starting out. But now it's become a performance-killing habit that's robbing you of speed on every shift. Here's the physics problem. When you pull the clutch lever completely, you're totally disconnecting the engine from the rear wheel. For that half second while you're shifting, you're essentially coasting. The engine RPMs drop dramatically, the bike loses forward momentum, and when you release the clutch, the engine has to work overtime to catch back up to wheel speed. That gap between engine and wheel speed costs you precious velocity every single time. Think about what's happening during that shift. You're cruising at 60 miles per hour, you pull the clutch fully, shift up, and for that brief moment, your bike is just rolling on momentum alone. The engine isn't driving anything. When you dump the clutch back out, there's this jarring reconnection as the engine tries to match the wheel speed again. You feel it as a slight lurch, and that lurch is wasted energy. The fix is finding your clutch's friction zone and using just enough lever pull to break the connection. You don't need to pull it to the bar. You need to find that sweet spot where the clutch plates just barely disengage. This keeps the engine loaded and connected to the drivetrain, minimizing that RPM drop and maintaining your forward momentum. Here's how to find it. Start in a parking lot at low speed. Pull the clutch lever slowly until you feel the bike start to lose power to the rear wheel. That's your friction zone. It's probably only about halfway through the lever's travel, maybe less. Practice shifting right at that point where the connection breaks, but the engine stays loaded. Once you nail this technique, your shifts become lightning fast. The engine RPM barely drops, the bike doesn't lose momentum, and you maintain that smooth power delivery that keeps you accelerating hard through every gear change. Instead of fighting the bike, you're working with it. The difference is night and day. Instead of that choppy, lurching shift pattern that makes you feel like you're wrestling the machine, you get seamless power delivery that keeps building speed. Your bike will feel more responsive, more connected, and significantly faster without changing a single bolt. This takes practice. Your muscle memory is programmed for that full pull, so you need to retrain it. Start slow, focus on finding that friction zone every time, and gradually build up your speed as the technique becomes natural. Once you master this, you'll wonder how you ever rode any other way. Mistake number two, the throttle chop chaos. The second mistake is even more destructive to your speed and smoothness. You're completely chopping the throttle closed during upshifts like you're hitting a kill switch. This creates a violent chain reaction that unsettles your entire motorcycle and forces you to wait for the chassis to recover before you can accelerate hard again. Here's what happens when you chop that throttle completely. The moment you snap it shut, all the bike's weight transfers forward onto the front wheel. The front suspension compresses, the rear gets light, and the whole chassis pitches forward like you just hit the brakes. When you crack the throttle back open after the shift, the bike lurches backward as the weight transfers to the rear again. The suspension has to settle, the chassis has to stabilize, and only then can you get back to serious acceleration. This weight transfer chaos is killing your lap times and your street performance. Every time you shift, you're essentially hitting a reset button on your bike's stability. The suspension is bouncing around, the contact patches are changing, and the bike needs time to find its balance again before it can put power down effectively. The physics here are brutal. When you completely close the throttle, you're not just stopping acceleration, you're creating active deceleration through engine braking. This sudden change in forces throws the bike's weight distribution completely out of whack. Professional riders know this, which is why they never completely chop the throttle during performance shifts. The correct technique is called preloading the shifter and barely lifting the throttle. Here's how it works. As you're accelerating and approaching your shift point, you put light upward pressure on the shift lever with your toe. Not enough to actually shift, just enough to take up the slack and put tension on the mechanism. This is the preload. Now instead of chopping the throttle completely, you barely roll it off, just enough to relieve the torque load on the transmission gears. We're talking about maybe a 10% throttle reduction, not a complete closure. The moment the gears unload, that preloaded shifter pops into the next gear instantly. Then you immediately roll back onto the throttle. The result is magical. The shift happens so fast that the engine RPM barely changes, the bike's weight distribution stays neutral, and the chassis never gets unsettled. To an observer, it looks like you never shifted at all. The bike just keeps accelerating smoothly through the gear change without any interruption in power delivery. Advanced riders take this even further by maintaining slight throttle pressure through the entire shift. This technique requires perfect timing and a well-tuned quick shifter or a lot of practice, but it creates completely seamless shifts where the bike never stops accelerating. The engine stays loaded, the chassis stays stable, and the power delivery is absolutely constant. This technique transforms how your bike feels. Instead of that choppy, lurching acceleration pattern where you gain speed, lose it during the shift, then gain it back, you get one continuous surge of acceleration that builds through every gear. Your bike feels more powerful, more responsive, and significantly faster without any modifications. The key is retraining your right hand. You've been taught to chop the throttle for safety reasons, and that muscle memory runs deep. Start practicing in a safe environment, focusing on that minimal throttle lift. It feels wrong at first because you're not used to keeping power on during shifts, but once you nail the timing, you'll never want to go back to the old method. Mistake number 3, the downshift disaster. The third mistake happens when you're slowing down, and it's potentially the most dangerous of all three. You're downshifting without proper rev matching, and this creates a nightmare scenario where your rear wheel briefly locks or skips, destabilizing the bike exactly when you need maximum control. Here's the disaster in motion. You're approaching a corner or a red light, so you downshift to a lower gear without blipping the throttle. The moment you release that clutch, the rear wheel tries to spin the engine up to match the higher RPM required for the lower gear. This creates massive engine braking force that can lock the rear wheel or cause it to skip and chatter. This is happening right when you need your bike to be most stable, during corner entry or emergency braking situations. Instead of smooth, controlled deceleration, you get chassis instability, potential rear wheel lockup, and a bike that's fighting you when you need it to be predictable. The physics are simple but brutal. When you downshift without rev matching, you're forcing the rear wheel to accelerate the entire engine and transmission to a higher RPM instantly. That's a massive load and something has to give. Usually it's your rear tire's grip on the pavement. The fix is the throttle blip, also called rev matching. Before you release the clutch on a downshift, you give the throttle a quick blip to bring the engine RPM up to match what it needs to be for the lower gear. This matches the engine speed to the wheel speed, so when you release the clutch, there's no jarring difference between them. The technique is simple. Pull in the clutch, shift down, blip the throttle to raise the RPM, then release the clutch smoothly. The engine and wheel speeds are now matched, so the downshift is seamless and the bike stays stable. This is absolutely critical for performance riding and essential for safety in any situation where you need to slow down quickly. So there you have it, the 3 mistakes that are making your bike feel slow and clunky. Stop pulling the clutch all the way to the bar, quit chopping the throttle like a kill switch, and always blip your downshifts to match engine speed. Master these 3 techniques and your bike will feel smoother, faster, and more connected than you ever thought possible. Challenge yourself to practice these on your next ride and feel the transformation. Subscribe for more advanced riding techniques that don't cost a dime, and drop a comment telling me which mistake you've been making the most.